Hey everybody, it's 9 o'clock and 9 o'clock is with me, Father Warner. We are in Thursday of the 10th week in Ordinary Time. Our text today is taken from Matthew chapter 5 verse 20 to 26. And I've entitled today's teaching, Mind Your Language. So let's see what the text is all about. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you, if you are angry with your brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, you fool, you will be liable to hell or fire. So, when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go first and be reconciled to your brother and sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. Now, my dear friends, for many, the spiritual life is about the strict avoidance of actions that have been laid down as sinful. Yet the avoidance of sinful actions begins with tackling it at the source of it all and not merely focusing on the act in itself. You know, the late Father Francis Ripoll, our professor at St. Pius X College, our diocesan seminary in Mumbai, he would often say to us in class, he would say, the matter of the heart is the heart of the matter. Now, it is the heart that Jesus desires to fix, because therein, within the heart, lies what I call God's positioning system, or GPS. So it is there that GPS exists to heaven. Now, the Sermon on the Mount, as preached by Jesus, was really a call to every disciple to choose to be different. You know, I've said this before, the Greek word for different would translate in Greek as hagios, or let's put it this way, hagios is translated as different, which means holy. So the Sermon on the Mount is a call to a different way of life, a holy way of life. Now, over the next few days, I know we'll be interrupted. I shouldn't say use the word interrupted, but tomorrow we will celebrate the Feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, then the Immaculate Heart of Mary. So we will miss two days of Matthew's Gospel, but over the next few days we shall study 6 hypotheses. You'll find these hypotheses if you look at your Bible in chapter 5 verse 21 all the way down to the end of chapter 5, that's verse 47. And 6 times in all, Jesus will use the words, you have heard it said to you, but I say to you. You know, for 400 years before Christ, the prophetic voice had fallen silent. And in this time, there arose several religious groups who became the de facto leaders of the Jewish religious faith. Now, today's gospel mentions in verse 20 the scribes and the Pharisees, because they emerged out of such a context of silence on the part of God. God didn't send a prophet for 400 years, and then arose the scribes and Pharisees. Now, to the people of Israel, the scribes and the Pharisees were looked up as the preservers and the transmitters of the Jewish faith and also its orthodoxy. So for the ordinary layman or woman, they would consider the scribes, the Pharisees, these groups of religious men, as models of Jewish faith, as leaders of Jewish faith. Now, Christ did not see it that way, or rather did not see these groups in the same way. For him, these scribes, these Pharisees, they have just set the bar of faith and religious teachings extremely low. In fact, for Christ, they have reset the bars of faith to suit their convenience. And we need to be very careful as religious leaders not to adjust the teachings, the doctrine of the faith to our conveniences. This is a great and a grave danger. And that is why Jesus says 6 times, he says, you have heard it said. Heard from whom? Heard from the scribes. Heard from the Pharisees. Even more, my dear friends, Christ expects the disciples not to benchmark their spiritual life lower than the religious establishment of his time, but he says today, exceed it, exceed. He wants us to exceed their righteousness. You see this in verse 20. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. And this must have come as a shock to the disciples of Jesus, who held the Pharisees and the scribes in the highest esteem. Now, too often faith, and I may say conveniently so, I think faith too often is measured by the standards of others. Yeah, we look at the faults of religious men and women of our time, and we use that as the exit route for lowering our spiritual standards. Let me give you another example which you hear umpteen times. You say, what's the point of going to church? Because the people who go to church come out and then they gossip. What does their gossiping or their bad behavior have to do with your going to church? You don't go to church for them. You go to church because you share a relationship with Christ. So whenever people say this, I think we need to call them out, because this is merely an excuse. They use somebody else's. I mean, you don't say that because we gossip at the workplace, I don't go to the workplace. I mean, what a silly argument that would make, yeah? And nobody would ever do that. You just lump it and you'd go to the workplace, even if everybody was gossiping or everybody was badly dressed or whatever other your pet excuse may be. Now, Christ wants us to strive, therefore, for the highest standard that should be held and not seek the lowest. You know, the faults of your parish priest or any priest or religious nun or whoever, the bishop, the cardinal, the faults of any of these people are theirs to bear before the judgment seat of God. It's not yours to seek as a way to diminish the demands of faith. So the 6 hypotheses that we will study, as I said, over the next few days, are a call to what St. Ignatius of Loyola would call the marges, to the more. So that's why Jesus says, you have heard it said, but I say to you, and he will say, I say to you, give more, love more, forgive more. And what Christ asks from us is always more. Now, the first in the series of what I call Ye Dil Mange Mo, remember many years ago Pepsi ran this ad campaign, Ye Dil Mange Mo. So the first in what I call this Ye Dil Mange Mo campaign of Jesus is the examination of our hearts when it comes to anger. Now, the law of Moses set clear judgments for murder, and that's what we are doing today from verses 21 till 26. The law of Moses, clearly, there was a certain judgment for murder. If you read the original commandment, it is found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. You'll also find it in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 17. Yet, Jesus challenges us to deal with the problem of evil while it still resides as evil thoughts or feelings in our hearts before it gets a life of its own, before it finds expression in the evil works of our hands or the evil words of our mouths. You know, I read many years ago William Barclay, who writes a beautiful small series, not small, it's a very large work, but they're small books. So William Barclay, and he is a reformist, he notes that there were 2 Greek words for anger, because Jesus very clearly says in verse 22, but I say to you that if you are angry with your brother or sister, and he notes there are 2 words for anger. The first word that he says, that he puts down, is the word thumos. Now, thumos was anger, with a very fiery kind of anger. It kind of flames up and then it dies out. That's key. It flames up and dies out. And the other word is orge. Orge was this smoldering anger, the kind of anger that a person nurtures and keeps alive. And it is orge the kind of anger that we deliberately harbor in our hearts over long periods of time, that Jesus condemns here when he says very clearly. So he says to the disciples, this anger, but I say to you that if you are orge with your brother, that smoldering bitterness going on and on and on and on. Sometimes I meet people, their in-laws or whoever they are angry with are long dead and gone over the last 10 years. They are still grumbling. Yeah, it's smoldering. What's the point of this, says Jesus. So Jesus' concern here is the real damage that we can inflict with our words. And you will see he teaches that in verses 22 onwards. Now, when you think about it, none of these three behaviors, because see, he highlights three behaviors. He highlights anger, then he says the second one is insult of your brother or sister, and then you call somebody else fool. So anger, you call the insult, the word was raka. Raka really was like spit, calling somebody you are like spit, so you are nothing, you are insignificant. So anger, raka, or calling a person a fool, all three, says Jesus, constitute murder per se. But all these three words are precursors of murderous behavior, the kind of things that cause us to then spiral out of control and commit murderous deeds. I've always said this, nobody gets up one fine day, takes a knife and plunges it into somebody else's heart. It builds up. It builds up because first you're angry, or you insult your brother, or you call your brother a fool, and then it just goes on, and orge goes on, orge goes on. It's smoldering and smoldering and smoldering, and then you explode. So we have to be careful of our words. Words are very, very important, my dear friends. Very often there's an old saying that says, children say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. That's a lie. That's a lie. Why? Because words have the capacity to wound us emotionally and spiritually, as surely as a knife has the capacity to wound us physically. And most of us still carry the emotional scars of words that someone said years ago. Jesus' admonition about words of hate and anger are therefore intended to prevent inflicting real injury. While we may regard very often words as insignificant, Jesus today is warning us that God regards them as very highly significant. So as I said today at the start of today's teaching, mind your language. Bye for now, everybody. If you like this teaching, share it with your friends. Do hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet done it. There's no charge for hitting the subscribe button. Leave your comments, your thoughts, your personal reflections. Thank you, as I always pray for you, and thank you for your kindness to our home here in Nouveau. I must tell you that though I record many of these teachings in advance, and I'm recording this one in advance because as of today I will be in Malaysia. I'll be in there for about 7 days. But when I record this, I always like to tell you, I'm always recording many days earlier. So several days ago, one of our little children, Sarachana, went to school for the first day. I cannot tell you, I posted a picture of her on Facebook. I cannot tell you the excitement. I don't think she slept the whole night through. This was one kid that didn't go to first day in nursery, bawling, screaming. She went quite happy, came back with a bigger smile on her face. The first thing she said to me, they gave us balloons. Yeah. So thank you for your love, your kindness. I will give you an update. If I may say very quickly, it's going to take us about 3 months more or so to purchase the girls' home. There's a paper that takes about a month with the lawyer because I think I mentioned before, it's a title search. We're waiting for that to happen. Also, the person who's selling us the place is a shippy. So we have to wait for him to come back from his assignment, and then we will close the deal. But I will keep you posted about all of that. I also must tell you that our children over the weekend went I think with all the youth of North and South Goa, this is the charismatic renewal, all went out for a picnic and they had a great time. So thank you, keep well, God bless you, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Tomorrow is the solemnity of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Bye for now, everybody.